We are witnessing a major shift in momentum in favor of Ukraine, and that momentum has the feeling of being irreversible. I'm an optimist by nature, but I'll tell you why I am optimistic about Ukraine. I believe that Ukrainian forces can push Russian forces back to the 23 February line by the end of this year, and that they will reclaim Crimea next year, and that they will have achieved their objectives of total restoration of Ukrainian sovereignty over all of their territory by next year. Now, a lot of hard fighting still to go. Russians still have lots of capabilities, troops, ammunition, and the Kremlin does not care about how many people are killed in the process. So there's still a lot that has to be done. But if the West sticks together with Ukraine in terms of sanctions, financial support, and delivering everything that we said we would, which I believe is the case, then that I am confident in Ukraine. Chancellor Scholz, the Bundeskanzler of the German Federal Republic, reported that he had a 80-minute phone call with President Putin. And he told President Putin that unless Russia withdraws all of their troops from Ukraine and respects the territorial sovereignty of Ukraine, then any negotiated settlement is inconceivable. That's from the German Bundeskanzler. So this is why I feel confident that the coalition is going to stick together with Ukraine. Look, the Russians made 4 very significant strategic miscalculations before 24 February. Number one, they believed that they had force advantage, that their capabilities were far superior to the Ukrainians. They had no respect for Ukrainian forces, and they really thought that they would be able to roll into Kyiv the way they did into Budapest and Prague back during the Cold War. So that was the first strategic miscalculation. The second strategic miscalculation they made was that they believed they would be able to isolate Ukraine from any sort of third-party support. No way would Europe or the US or Canada do anything to help Ukraine because, frankly, we didn't really do anything after Russia invaded Georgia, after they supported the Assad regime when it jumped over President Obama's red line, and after they invaded Crimea in 2014. We really didn't do anything of significance. And so I think they obviously felt confident that that would be the case again. So Ukraine would be alone. The third major strategic miscalculation that they made was that the gain would be worth the pain. In other words, destruction of Ukraine as a state, and even the idea of Ukraine as a state, would be so beneficial to Putin himself and to the Kremlin that any sanctions, any problems, whatever that came along, it'd be worth it. And then the fourth strategic miscalculation they made was that they believed that they would get a twofer, that they would be able to not only break Ukraine, but break NATO. So these 4 things, that was in their thinking when they launched their attack back on 24 February. Now, we know from history that war is a test of logistics and it's a test of will. And as I have, over the last 6 months, watched the Russian forces, it became clear that their logistical system was not going to be up to the task. It was not designed to sustain long-term land combat operations outside of Russia. But that's exactly what they're having to do. Of course, they didn't anticipate this. They thought they'd be done in a few days. So they've had to create a system to sustain the millions of rounds of artillery, the fuel and maintenance and stuff are required for thousands of vehicles, rations for 200,000 plus soldiers, all of these things, and they don't have the system to do it. At the same time, the sanctions were having effect. Most of the precision weapons, the top quality weapons that the Russians use, cruise missiles, Iskander, etc., depend on imported components. The Iskander itself, 85% non-Russian components. So sanctions have prevented them from being able to replenish those losses. So that's, and I'll pause in just a moment, the test of logistics. The Russians were in a bad fix. For the Ukrainians, it's getting better each week as the West provides equipment, ammunition, and so on. The test of will, of course, we have seen Ukrainian soldiers clearly had superior will to the Russian soldiers. That's been obvious. The Ukrainian people, incredible, their resilience, their will. So the ultimate test of will is going to be between the Kremlin and Western capitals. There are at least 700,000 Ukrainians in uniform. You'll remember that back right after 24 February, the Ukrainian government said all men between 18 and 60, I think, cannot leave. So in effect, that was they made the decision to do a general mobilization immediately. So that means millions of military age women and men are still in Ukraine prepared to fight. Whereas Russia has chosen not to do any kind of a mobilization. Instead, they've used a variety of different things to try and attract people to want to join the Russian army. Very, very few people want to join the Russian army. And so the Russians are the ones with the manpower problem. The Ukrainians, on the other hand, have plenty of bodies. Now, they don't have 700,000 fully trained soldiers. I want to be clear about that. Because they've had to create this territorial defense force. They're having to create systems to train. You've got Ukrainians being trained in UK and in Poland and in Germany and in other places, but manpower is not going to be the problem. We know from Clausewitz that Clausewitz describes this concept called the culminating point. The culminating point, of course, is where an attacking force loses impetus because of casualties. They run out of resources. Enemy resistance is too tough. The defenders' resistance. And so they lose the will or the ability to continue the attack. And I was pretty sure that they were going to culminate, the Russians were going to culminate sometime in August, which in fact they did. Ukrainian General Staff obviously could see this more clearly than I could. And they anticipated the culmination point. And this is why Clausewitz talks about culminating point, because what you want to accelerate your enemy's arrival at his culminating point so that then you can be prepared to launch a counterstrike somewhere when that enemy, the attacker who has culminated, is now at the most vulnerable. So I think that the Ukrainians began planning for this at least 2, maybe 3 months ago to be able to do this